Hi, Human Physiology class. This is Mr. Yago. I'm going to kind of walk you through how we're going to set up this unit as well as units that will last throughout the rest of the year. Basically, this format allows me to talk through the notes that we would normally be taken in class. And again, this is a means for me to make sure that if I'm gone over the course of the next couple months for something, that you can still hear my voice and that you can still learn something. So as you see here, this is Chapter 9, Circulatory System. As you go through these videos, I'm going to highlight what sections we have. There are 4 sections for this particular unit. And I also want you guys to take notes off of this. So I know some of you have not been taking very good notes. I encourage you to take good notes and use these slides very similar to how you would take notes in class. If you are watching this video, I'm hoping that you have already watched Crash Course, which is the intro video that was on my website before this. It's kind of a good little intro to see what this system's about. And with that said, over the course of this unit, we'll be talking about the role of the circular system today. In the next couple days, looking at the anatomy and physiology of the human heart, where I'm going to have you guys go through a diagram to identify the parts of the heart, as well as the flow of blood through the heart. We're also going to look at the cardiac cycle and then end with human vessels, arteries versus veins. I find that section 9.2 and section 9.4 are probably the most complicated because there are a variety of chambers in the heart and the path of blood can be sometimes confusing. And then the vessels, it's very similar to we went through bones and muscles. Not as much, but there are a fair amount of arteries and veins for you guys to know. So let's get started. I would pull out your notebooks if you are taking notes, which again I highly recommend. And one of the very first things I want you guys to do is get down some vocabulary development. These are 22 terms you will definitely see on a quiz later in this unit and again on the test. What I usually have you guys do is put them into some app, or if you want to write them down, that's fine. I discourage you from just screenshotting this and putting it into some type of file. The process of you texting it into your phone or writing it down on a piece of paper is actually doing you some good as far as putting it into your brain. So again, at this time, I highly urge you to pause the video, put these into an app, put these onto a flashcard or into your notebook. All right, now that you got those vocab words in, let's take a look at what is the role of the circular system. And as you can see here, I got 2 images. The anatomy essentially of the circular system with a very crude answer would be the heart, which is located right here in the rib cage. We'll talk about its specific location in 9.2. Blood, that's going to run throughout the body, and notice that some of it is red, some of it is blue, and you can see that in this diagram as well. And then obviously the blood vessels, which are going to run throughout your body. So those are the major anatomical parts that we're going to look at. Thankfully, up to this point, you already have blood under wraps. You understand what blood is, what it's made out of, and what its functions are. So it's going to be a lot easier if you understand what this system's about. Now, on the right is a very important picture. All right, we have the brain, we have the lungs, the heart, the liver, muscles, and a kidney, just to give you some examples. And in red here, this is essentially going to signify oxygenated blood. And it's going to be a very high pressure system because it's coming directly out of the heart. But one of the things we're going to discuss is how blood moves from the lungs and then back out through the body. A lot of you can probably understand why. If we're going to have oxygenated blood, that blood needs to be oxygenated in the lungs. So once it gets oxygenated in the lungs, you notice that it's going to come back into the heart and then get pumped, what we call in this class, systemically throughout the body. So it's going to make its way to our internal organs, it's going to make its way to our muscles, and then obviously it can be filtered through things like the kidney and the liver. Now the blue track here is bringing blood back to the heart, and that is going to pump it back to the lungs so that it can go through this whole cycle again. And we'll talk about that in much greater detail. All right, let's take a second to look at the major functions of this system. It's very easy. To this point, we've had a lot of units where the functions have been very in-depth, but really what I want you guys to know is that this system is responsible for delivering blood, which again we know contains nutrients and oxygen after it comes from the lungs, and also to remove waste and CO2. So this is essentially a 2-system process, pumping blood through the lungs and back, pumping blood to the heart or throughout the body and back. This image right here is kind of an X-ray image, or what we call a CT scan as well, and you can see various parts of the body. One thing that I really want you to focus on is obviously the thickness of these vessels. This right here, which I'm running my pointer over here, comes out of the top of the heart. Some of you might know this as big red. Others might know this as the aorta, which is the biggest and strongest blood vessel. It comes directly out of the top of the heart. And notice that that will then smooth out into arteries, and those arteries return into arterioles, and eventually into really, really tiny blood vessels called capillaries, which we'll talk about more in section 9.4. But again, major functions: deliver blood, contain nutrients, that contains nutrients and oxygen, remove waste and CO2. Alright, the last thing I just want to quickly discuss is the difference between these two circulations. And this is the last thing that I'm going to have you guys write down today. Very, very short section, just kind of introing everything we're going to do. 9.2 will be in much greater depth. We have the systemic circuit. That's how you say that. And that's going to deliver blood to all body cells and carries away waste. So the systemic circuit is essentially from the heart out to the body. So whether it be, as you notice, I'm going to start my cursor right here. This would be considered the aorta, and it would branch up towards the brain, and it would also branch down into the body, into the legs. So this is a very crude drawing. It is not to scale, and it is not anatomically correct, but it just gives you an idea of that systemic circulation throughout the body. So it's going to deliver blood to all the cells, and once it reaches those cells, so we'll say maybe right up here, we kind of have this kind of estuary, as you would call it, where maybe salt water meets fresh water, but in this area, this is where that blood is going to get dropped off, and notice it's oxygen, and it is then going to pick up CO2. Now, the reason this happens is that is the byproduct of our cells' respiration, how they make energy. We need oxygen to make energy, and a byproduct of that is CO2. So CO2 is going to be carried in that blood back to the heart. Notice that it's in blue. And a lot of you are probably going to think that you have blue blood in you. You look at your veins and it kind of looks like you have blue blood. But really you don't. It's just to kind of give you that contrast. Essentially, blood that is deoxygenated, essentially has CO2 in it, is actually going to be more of a darker red color versus the oxygenated blood being a lighter red color. So again, just for a little bit of contrast. Secondly, we have the pulmonary circulation, and that eliminates carbon dioxide and oxygenates blood. This is the lung pathway. So systemic up through here, throughout the body, and then we kind of have this one that moves in between the lungs. So follow me way down here on this picture. Let's say this is your feet, and you just dropped off oxygen in your feet and picked up CO2. That blood is going to travel in a vein, which is going to go back to the heart. And it's going to come up into the heart, which we'll discuss. This is the right atrium in a little bit. It's going to pump down into the right ventricle, and it's going to go into your pulmonary arteries, okay, which are right up here. Notice that it takes a split. We got to the right, essentially your left lung, if we're talking anatomically, and over here to the left, your right lung. This is the pulmonary circuit, so it's going to go from the lungs and back on both sides, all right? And that is going to oxygenate the blood. Here is another estuary, so to speak, where we have mixing. We drop off CO2, and when we exhale, like that, it's going to get rid of all that CO2. And when we inhale, we're going to bring oxygen in, and that's going to diffuse. We've used the process of diffusion, which is passive, and get that into the blood, and that's going to bring blood, oxygenated blood, back to the heart, and then we're going to get a really, really strong pump, okay? Your left ventricle is one of the strongest parts of your heart because it has to have enough pressure to push all the way up to the brain and all the way down to the toes. So systemic throughout the body, pulmonary between heart and lungs, and that's going to be our major pumping route throughout the body. So that's everything for this section. Like I said, very short, but I want you to, again, to take an opportunity to take really good notes and make sure that you are better prepared for these examinations as we get closer. Next on your to-do list, if you look at your outline, should be homework assignment 9.1, which you'll have time to work on next. All right, that's all I have. Mr. Yago, out.